Hello?
You pig. You fat pig. You pig. You bitch pig. I'm looking through your phone, baby.
Hey gang, Uncle Todd and Sonny here. And as you can see, my light was fixed. I don't know, do you like it better this way or this way? Eh, need the light on so I can see my writing. And we're sticking with slashers, and we have the OG of holiday slasher films, Bob Clark's Black Christmas. Now, interesting to note about this one is that a lot of the things we saw in John Carpenter's Halloween were originated in Black Christmas. The film originally was going to be very, very graphic, but Clark decided it would be scarier and more interesting if you got kind of arty and fancy, like Argento does, only without all the gore. And he's not wrong. It is a very, very suspenseful film. And we got quite the cast. We have Olivia Hussey, who I first saw in school in Romeo and Juliet, which was edited to take out the brief snips of nudity, because we were all freshmen. You can't be watching that kind of stuff in school. And but she had a really interesting career. Besides being in such high-profile mysteries as Death on the Nile and the third version of The Cat and the Canary, she had quite a list of genre titles, including the It miniseries, where she played the adult Bev, Virus, which was a contagion type movie where the Earth's population is reduced down to this one ice Arctic station because the virus couldn't get there because of the cold, and then they found out that an earthquake could trigger some bombs that would hit them, so they had to go on a rescue mission. There's also Turkey Shoot, which was a Most Dangerous Game style film from Australia, and she played Norman Bates' mother in Psycho 4, The Beginning. We also have, I know I'm going to screw this name up, Keir Dullea, who of course was the person who became the Space Baby in 2001 and then reappeared again in 2010. He was also in the giallo Devil in the Brain, as well as the weird sci-fi movie Welcome to Blood City and Blind Date. Not the Bruce Willis Kim Basinger film. This was a mid-80s horror film filmed in Greece that was kind of a giallo type film, and it featured early roles for both Kirstie Alley and Marina Sirtis. Next we have Margot Kidder, who of course is famous for playing Lois Lane in all 4 of the original Superman movies, although she was only in like the last few minutes of Superman 3. And but she had a very long list of genre credits. She was in Brian De Palma's Sisters as twins, one good, one evil. She was also in the Amityville Horror, the original one, And she also did a Disney film, the hard-boiled detective spoof Trenchcoat, and was also in the Richard Pryor dramedy Some Kind of Hero. We also have Andrea Martin. You probably remember most from SCTV. My favorite of her skits on SCTV was when she did a spot-on Bernadette Peters impression. I mean, that voice was perfect. She was also in such films as Cannibal Girls with Eugene Levy of SCTV. She was in the Dudley Moore comedy Holy Moses, which was a spoof of biblical epics. The Joe Dante Inner Space, if you remember that one, Dennis Quaid gets shrunk and then accidentally injected into Martin Short's bloodstream. And currently, she is the awesome demon fighting nun on the show Evil. And lastly, we have the great John Saxon, who had been acting since the 50s. He's got a lot of genre credits. I mean, Enter the Dragon, where he fought next to Bruce Lee and Jim Kelly. Blood Beach, about a large mollusk type creature that was sucking people down under the sand and eating them. How can we forget he was in Nightmare on Elm Street 1, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and played himself in New Nightmare. He was also in the Easter slasher, Nightmare Beach, set in Miami, but filmed in Italy. The comedy My Mom's a Werewolf, playing the one who turns her into a werewolf. The Italian, well, it's not a zombie film, but it is pretty gnarly, Cannibal Apocalypse, which is about a bunch of Vietnam veterans who become cannibals due to the chemicals they were exposed to. He was also in the fantasy Prisoner of the Lost Universe as the warlord of that universe. And he was in a couple of Jollies. He was in the first, or what's considered the first, Mario Bava's The Girl Who Knew Too Much. And then later was in Dario Argento's Return to Giallo's Tenebrae. Okay. Now, interesting fact about this film, John Carpenter talked to Clark about if he was going to do a sequel to Black Christmas. And he said, yes, I thought I'd do it one set in October and call it Halloween. But he never did anything with that. And then, of course, we know Carpenter did make a slasher called Halloween. That was the one that actually brought slashers to the public's attention before becoming blockbusters with the first Friday the 13th. And in our first bit of swiping from this film, we get the opening in which a mysterious person climbs into the attic of a sorority house. See what I mean? Although they didn't have the Steadicam that Carpenter used, hadn't been invented yet, so they just strapped it on the guy's chest and just had him do that. This kind of opening was also used in horror films, Tobe Hooper's Funhouse and Brian De Palma's reworking of the film Blow Up, which was called Blow Out, because it was an audio engineer who recorded a car's tire blowing out. Anyways, next, the sorority gets a phone call.
Hello? Hello? Hey, quiet! It's him again! The Mona!
Yes. Apparently, they've been getting these kind of calls lately. even before the guy snuck into the attic. But this is your standard, oh yeah, I want to do you, baby, yeah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. Or maybe you don't know that kind of thing. I only know what I know because of movies.
That's right.
Anywho, our young naive freshman who's just arrived, Claire, after having said goodbye to her boyfriend Chris, who's a townie, she goes upstairs to pack because her father's going to be picking her up for Christmas break. And that doesn't go quite as planned.
Who is it?
Jim Carter.
Wow. Okay. That was quick. Our killer then takes her dead body up to the attic and puts her in a rocking chair. We're then introduced to the house mother, Mrs. Mack, and get some hilariously drunken antics, as she is an alcoholic. The next day, our main girl, Jess, goes to talk to her boyfriend, Peter. It's right before his big recital, but she has very important news to tell him.
I'm pregnant.
Jess, that's fantastic.
I don't want it.
You don't want it?
No. I'm going to have an abortion.
Very timely for today. If, pay attention to any politics. Now, when this film was made back in '74, the procedure had only been legal for, I think, less than a year at that point. So this is fairly new and very topical. And given the things going on today, still very topical. And in a twist on what would have then been considered the normal way of going, where the boyfriend wants it gotten rid of and the girlfriend wants to get married and have it, it's flipped. She has plans for a career and this doesn't figure into that, and he's willing to get married, dump everything, and raise the family with her. So they argue, and then she leaves. And this is the first bit of her not being so likable, because she tells him this right before a major recital. So, you know, he's probably not going to do that well.
Could be.
Anyway, Claire's father shows up. Claire doesn't meet him. He goes to the sorority. She's not there. We get some more drunken antics from Ms. Mack. Then he goes to the brother fraternity house that's having a Christmas party with a Santa Claus for some needy children, where we are then given some drunken antics from Barb. Well, since no one can find her, Jess, who's returned to the house, gets a phone call and is told of this. Or, no, incorrect. They go to the police, where the desk sergeant is very unhelpful.
Now, Mr. Harrison, if you're convinced your daughter is missing, you can fill out one of these forms. I don't know if it's any consolation, but 90% of the time, girls are reported missing from the college. They're at a cabin somewhere with a boyfriend.
Thanks. But that's not much consolation.
That's right.
Exactly. We then get a really good bit of comedy from Barb.
Could you give me the number at the sorority house? Please.
Yeah, sure. It's, fellatio 20880.
Sorry. Yeah, this was back when telephones had prefixes for the different areas. Like the Klondike 2323, if you've ever heard that old commercial. And this guy writes it down. Anyway, Jess returns home, and she gets another of those obscene phone calls, but this one's a little different.
Billy? Oh, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number.
What your mother and I must know is, where did you put the baby?
You've got the wrong number.
That's creepy. Anyways, she hangs up on it. Then phone rings again. She picks it up, ready to give him what for, but it's Phil letting her know Claire's missing. They're not getting any help from the police. And so Jess says she'll go and find Chris and ask him about it.
Well, her father came to pick her up at 1 o'clock today and she didn't show. So he went down to the police station with Phil and Bob.
What happened?
They didn't take it seriously.
Well, all you sharp-eyed viewers out there, that is Art Hindle, who would later go on to be in the 1970 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers as one of the pod people, and was a recurring character in the Porky's trilogy. I believe he was in all three. Anyway, when he finds out that the police aren't doing anything, he storms into the police station, berates the desk clerk, and demands to talk to Lieutenant Fuller. Well, Lieutenant Fuller is dealing with a woman whose daughter had not come home from school. This is very serious. There was an assault done on a woman previously that people have mentioned. Well, could be a connection. Don't know. But back at the house, we get some more drunken antics of Barb, who regales everyone with how long turtle lovemaking lasts. Apparently it's 3 days. Anyway, when it becomes obvious she is non-functioning anymore from all the alcohol she's been drinking, she's convinced to go upstairs to bed. At which point, Jess and Chris arrive and tell everyone about the missing girl. So, everybody grabs their coats and heads out.
Any of you find anything, I want you to send someone out immediately to report it to me. Is that clear? Are there any questions? Okay, let's go.
So, they search the park. Peter, having failed his recital, big time, destroys his piano. Then goes over to sorority to wait for Jess. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mack, the house mother, is preparing to leave. She's going to her sister's for the holidays. And she's got a cab waiting. And she hears the cat up in the attic. So she goes up to look. And, well, we know what's waiting in the attic, don't we? Are pulleys and hooks standard equipment for attics in Canada. But got a pretty good idea she's done for. Fortunately, so is the schoolgirl they were looking for. They find her and she heard. Not much of a battery in there. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes. The little girl is unalive. And most of the people return to the police station. Jess goes back to the sorority because she was supposed to meet Peter after recital, and gets another obscene phone call, much like the one she got earlier. You know, talking about Billy and all these weird noises. So she calls the police and tells them about it. And again, the desk sergeant is very unhelpful. But Claire's father hears the address she gives, and he tells Lieutenant Fuller, who calls in the desk sergeant to find out what all this is about. And he said, well, you know, I just didn't want to bother you with it.
A high school girl's been murdered. Mr. Harrison's daughter is missing. And now at the house where she lives, the other girls are getting obscene phone calls. Don't you think we ought to look into it, Nash?
And then we come to the result of him writing down that phone number.
New exchange?
Yeah, Felicia. One of the girls that was in this afternoon gave it to me.
She gave it to you.
Yeah.
Nash, I don't think you could pick your nose without written instructions.
Poor Nash. He is just not meant to be a cop. Anyhow, back at the sorority. Turns out Peter was inside the house. He got in cold waiting outside and went inside and fell asleep in one of the rooms upstairs. Probably Jess's. Probably been there before. You don't know. Anyway, they have another fight. He is very adamant that she could have the baby, they could get married, and she could still go to school and have her career. But she's like, no. And she's not going to let him give up his career, which he wants to do now. Well, it's at an impasse. And when the lieutenant arrives, something about Peter gets his spidey sense tingling.
Hi, Peter. I'll get Jess.
He could be the one. Maybe. Anyways, he introduces a phone man to Jess and tells her that they're going to be putting a tap and a trace on this line. There is another phone in the house besides the one downstairs, but it's a separate line from Mrs. Mack's room, so they don't need to worry about that.
Perhaps.
Don't jump ahead. Anyway, let's see, where were we? Yeah. All Jess has to do is keep him on the line. There's also a patrolman outside. He'll be there all night. And so they get all prepared, do a test call and all that stuff. And then, while Jess listens to some carolers outside, and Phil, who's been taking cold medicine and is zonked out, gone to bed, the killer sneaks downstairs from the attic and goes into Barb's room. Ow. Done in by a glass unicorn. What are the odds? This is unknown. This is unknown to everyone else in the house. The caller calls back, but he's not on long enough. She's got to keep him on longer. Meanwhile, the lieutenant goes to verify Peter's whereabouts and discovers the destroyed piano. Now, Phil is woken up, and they realize the house is not locked up, so they go to lock it up. And then Phil decides to check up on Barb.
Barb, are you awake?
No, I've run that into the ground. No, not that one either. The killer does call back, or what we assume is the killer, and this time we learn where he's calling from.
Say they got a trace on this one.
Yeah, let's have it.
He says the calls are coming from number 6 Belmont Street.
For Christ's sakes, Nash, you got it wrong. That's where the calls are going into.
That's where they're coming from, too, sir.
You're not rugged, it's true.
My eyes can't pop that big, but they're there in spirit. Yes, it's that old urban legend. The calls are coming from inside the house. Probably from Mrs. Mack's phone. Well, Lieutenant Fuller wastes no time in calling the guy out front.
Jennings?
Jennings? Jennings? Jennings? Jennings, where the hell are you?
Ew, gnarly. Well, can't get hold of him. He has the desk sergeant call Jess and tell her to walk straight out the door. But she starts getting obstinate. What about her two friends? Just go straight out the door. Well, I gotta check on my friends. Don't do that. And then he reveals the calls coming from inside the house, and she drops the phone and runs to check on her friends.
Bob? Phil?
Oh, even gnarlier! And the killer's behind the door! So she slams it in his face and runs down and locks herself in the basement, where she thinks she hears him leave. But then there's someone at the windows. Who could it be?
Jess, are you in there?
Peter! Oh my goodness. Well, he comes up to Jess, who's waiting with a crowbar, and she doesn't seem happy to see him. Then we cut to outside where the arriving police hear screams, and they break in the door and find this. Wow. Bludgeoned your own boyfriend to death. Well, Jess is in shock, naturally. And so they take her back upstairs, and doctor gives her a sedative and says maybe they can talk to her in the morning. And, well, Fuller thinks he's got it figured out. It was Peter.
This just about solves the mystery.
What?
Yeah. Well, the facts do seem to fit, don't they? I mean, there was a point where we thought it couldn't be Peter because he was in the house when she received one of the phone calls. But the calls are coming from inside the house. And he didn't come down until after the phone call, and he was pretty upset about the baby and all that. So, case closed. And they'll have someone stay with Jess. Well, they were going to, but the stress kind of got to Claire's father.
Come on, get out. Out. Come on, move.
Sure. Help me get him downstairs. He's got to go to a hospital.
Yep, he's totally out of it. They still haven't found his daughter. And so everybody leaves so they can get him to the hospital, and the reporter's been drawn off. They will probably come back in the morning to search the whole house, because up in the attic,
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
oh geez, the real killer's still inside.
I'm shocked.
But that's not all. Phone's ringing again. That's how it ends. I mean, sure, it could be Mrs. Mack's sister calling, or any of a number of people calling for someone in that house, but I do have to admit, the first time I saw this, I was really disappointed.
Get used to disappointment.
Well, to be fair, first time I saw this, I was a teenager. And I was disappointed because I went through all that and didn't find out who the killer was. What's the deal with Billy, Agnes, the baby? And it wasn't until I got older and have seen it again that the ambiguity of that ending really works. And it's a kind of ending that's been used again and again. The one I think of mostly is the film The House on Sorority Row, where the final girl defeats the killer, and she had been drugged earlier and had been fighting off the effects of it, and then with the killer taken care of, she gives in and passes out and goes to sleep, and then the killer wakes up. He wasn't dead. Those kind of things when I was younger really ticked me off. I was really big on that whole Hitchcock thing of you can do whatever you want to someone, to the main character, as long as it comes out all right in the end. But you get older and you start to appreciate these kinds of things as you go. And I think the ending really works. Now, ironically, the original script was actually much longer than what they filmed, and it had backstory on Billy and Agnes. And when they made the remake, I believe it was Silent Night, they added those back in. In fact, the novelization of this film, which was based on the original script, had those backstories in it. So if you don't care for those backstories that were in the remake, blame these guys. They wrote the original. But Clark, he had to cut it down to a feature length that would actually play and get people to see it. And you can't have a 3-hour horror film. So he streamlined it rather effectively, I think. And the ambiguity works in that. He wanted it to have that ending. In fact, the studio wanted him to change the ending to having everybody leave Jess, and then it turns out Chris was the killer all the time. And he said no, and refused to film it. and he stuck to his guns, and it worked. It was the second highest grossing Canadian film of that year. It didn't do so well over here in America, and the critics were not kind to it because of the ambiguity. But over the years, it's gotten popular and has become a bit of a cult film. Olivia Hussey once said that she was auditioning for the part of Roxanne in the Steve Martin movie, and he told her she was the star of his favorite film, and she thought he meant Romeo and Juliet. And he said, no, Black Christmas. I've seen it like 27 times. Of course, the role went to Daryl Hannah, but I find that interesting. And great cast. You got Margot Kidder, Keira Dullea, Olivia Hussey, John Saxon, the great John Saxon, one of the greatest unsung actors, and long career, and he never seems to age. Him and Richard Jekyll, they never seemed to age. Isn't that weird? From the 50s into the 80s, they seemed ageless. Kind of like Cassandra Peterson. Would you believe she's 70? I can't. But yeah, really, really good film. I like that the gore's not explicit, and they use a lot of quick cuts and stuff to kind of get around it. It works. It builds tension, and as filmmakers back in the golden age knew, what's not shown is scarier than what is, because your mind can conjure up all kinds of worse things. That worked in the 60s haunted house film The Haunted too. We never see the ghost. But I really like this film, and it had a major impact on a lot of films that came after. The House on Sorority Row had a similar ending, where the final girl had been injected with a sedative by a bad guy who was trying to use her to trap the killer, and she was fighting it off, and then he got taken out by the killer, and then she dealt with the killer, and then thinking he was done away with, she finally gave in to the drug and fell asleep, only to have the killer open his eyes. That really ticked me off as a kid, but now that was cool. Yeah, really good film. Highly, highly recommended. Well, please hit like, share, and subscribe, and stay after the credits for my favorite scene.
It's me, Billy. Agnes, don't you tell what we did, Agnes.